At scale, scaling agile is easier than ever. Easily visualize your PI boards and dependencies. Visualize your path with clear roadmaps, all securely within Azure DevOps. Set clear PI objectives and goals to keep your team aligned and focused. Prioritize efficiently using weighted shortest job first. Manage risks effectively with the role framework. Gain insights with flow metrics. Simplify safe in Azure DevOps. Try at scale today.
All right, welcome everyone to this episode in our webinar series. I'm Mattias Olausson from Solidify, and today I have the pleasure of having Dan Hellem join us in this talk about how the Azure DevOps team plan and build Azure DevOps. So before we start, I'll just quickly share a few things about us, so you know a little bit about Solidify and perhaps the commercial you saw before we started here. So for those of you who haven't met us, maybe you know Dan more, and that's why you joined this webinar. Solidify, we're a professional services and product company working out of the Nordics, but been a long time Microsoft GitHub partner, and our speciality is technology and practices on top of the dev platforms. So we've had pleasure of working with Dan and the GitHub teams and provide services on top of those development environments. And over the years, we come to do a little bit of everything in this space. So we have managed services, we do consulting around the platform. We also quite recently started to adopt modern GRC practices, as well as filling gaps in between products and processes with some products that we make and sell, of course, like the at-scale product you saw in the lead-in here, as well as migration tools to complement the ones in the platforms. And we might come back and talk a little bit about what at scale is, but like you saw in the beginning, this is an extension to the Azure DevOps platform that we're really proud about, and it's specifically useful for organizations working with the Scale Agile framework, and it adds like an additional layer on top of Azure Boards. But without further ado, just with the background all set, I want to see if we get rid of this. Dan, hopefully you're in the call now, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Let me make sure I share properly here.
See if you can do that. And great that you could take time out of your schedule to join me here and talk a little bit about how Microsoft works.
Perfect. Thanks, Mattias. So you can see my screen, okay?
I think so. We're kind of sharing the not the presentation, but the PowerPoint. So
yeah, just the slides. Yep.
That's
I'm not going to
fine.
go through the full presentation part of it, so sure. This will be easier to flip through. So, all right, cool. Well, I'll get started. So thanks, Mattias, for inviting me in. As you said, I work on the Azure DevOps product. I manage all the investments in the board space, so anything around product planning. When you're talking about work items, you're talking about Kanban boards, you're talking about queries, delivery plans, that kind of thing. So this is kind of a little bit of a teaser on how we kind of work internally. We've been spending, the product's been around for 18 plus years. Went from an out-of-box product where we were shipping roughly about once every 6 months, once a year, to where we're shipping every single day. And so we thought it'd be good to kind of share kind of like some of the things that we've learned along the way, things that work for us to keeping our product healthy, keeping our teams healthy, and being able to work and scale up across our entire organization. One thing I'd just like to note is we are not a like a scaled agile framework shop, but there are many things that we do that are very similar. We don't necessarily prescribe to the whole safe construct, but we certainly do a lot of the things that are necessary to be successful and safe. So, so I just thought I would kind of walk through some of these things, kind of share with you how we work internally, and then you know, these are the things that are not only does the Azure DevOps team do, but also many teams inside of Microsoft. And we try to share with other teams across Microsoft on kind of the right way of using the product and in product planning and that kind of thing. So before we get started, there's a couple things just to note. So obviously our product's been around a long time. There's some things that we don't have to necessarily deal with. We don't have teams that jump from one part of the product to another every other sprint type thing. Our boards team is basically linked to the boards product, and we don't really have people bouncing around. So we don't have that problem where we have to like worry about capacity and things like that of spreading people thin across different parts of the product. This is focused on how we work inside of Azure DevOps. Like I said, the tool's been around quite some time. We've done a lot of conversations with, you know, groups like yourselves in the community, but also big customers on how they work, and we're kind of like understanding what works for them, and kind of built these practices over time of what we think is the best way to work using our tooling. Another important thing to note is you know, agile, Scrum, safe. There's a ton of opinions in this space, and so like what I'm showing you works really well for us and works well for Microsoft. Doesn't necessarily mean it works well for everybody, but I've been in a lot of different places in my career, and I have not seen an organization work as smoothly and cleanly as this one. And so there's obviously some things that we're doing pretty well in. So. But again, it's full of opinion, so just keep that in mind. And the other important thing to note here is the things that I'm going to be sharing are really more about culture and organization and how you set up your teams and how you work together. It's less about the tooling. So obviously tooling is important, but the reality is if I'm using Azure DevOps, I can do these things. If I use a competing product like Jira, I could still do the same kind of stuff. If I'm using, you know, our sister product in GitHub, you can do the same kind of stuff. You'll have problems if you're not a well-functioning team using any of those products, or you can use those products if you're working well and everything is just fine, right? So the products, the tooling itself, are not like a secret weapon type thing. All right, so let's talk about things that we'll kind of get into stuff that we think is important to us, and then I'll talk about things that aren't important to us. So what we try to do is we focus on a couple main buckets here. The first thing we really want to do is we want to understand usage, right? Our main focus is our customers using our product? Are they staying in the product? Are they engaged in the product? Are they happy with it? When we release new features, we focus on, you know, are they using those features? Why they're not using those features? That kind of thing. So that's one of the metrics that we really care about is acquisition, retention, engagement, satisfaction, and usage. And again, like the product isn't any good if people aren't using it. We also are very specific in how our DevOps process works. We need to make sure that things get through the system as quickly as they possibly can. So time to build, time to test, time to deploy, time to improve. These are all things that we try to get done. You know, anytime there's a bug that needs to get fixed or a change that needs to happen, we want to make sure that it's built in the right way. It goes through the right checks and balances and policies to make sure that it's, you know, safe and secure. Make sure that it gets out and we can test it rather quickly and get it to the deploy and get it to customers' hands relatively quick. So the pipeline throughput is very important for us. And then the last one is lifesite health. We're a global service all around the world, and we want to make sure that you know, time to detect issues and communicate those issues and resolve those issues is very important to us. And we have systems in place where we can we track you know, the right type of telemetry to make sure that, try to prevent the issues before they even happen, or understand that the issues are about to happen and where they might be happening. But the reality is we need to make sure our product is up and going for everybody all the time, and being able to understand when issues happen, how we communicate when issues happen, and mitigate those issues in a regular, quick way. Those are the most important things for us. So that being said, things that are not helpful to us, and again, just keep in mind that we're a fairly mature team. We've been around for a number of years, so we don't have. So some of these things you might be surprised that we don't care about. We don't care about doing estimates. We don't care about completing hours and how many hours it took to complete something. We don't care about team capacity, and we don't look at our burn downs and velocity charts. Again, part of that is how we're organized. Our boards team, for example, all focus on the boards work. Work comes in, we get it done, we move on to the next thing. So understanding capacity really doesn't matter to us, and understanding burn down doesn't necessarily matter to us. And because we're having regular conversations with each other on a regular basis, we understand if there's roadblocks and problems that we need to go address. Now, obviously, this is a lot different if you're a brand new team and you're a Scrum team that's just getting started. So things like estimates and completed hours and capacity and burn down, those things are all going to be more important to you as a group as you get started and mature over a period of time. All right, so let's jump into kind of our teams and how we plan stuff out. So the first thing to recognize is how we organize ourselves. If you're a large organization, multiple groups, multiple teams within those groups, we found that it's obviously it's difficult to understand who to go talk to, who owns what, if you don't have a similar team kind of set up for across your entire group setting. So for us, our teams are made up of two basically roles, and you'll notice a couple of roles that are missing here, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we have program management, which is basically a product owner. They're responsible for what we're building and why we're building it. So we typically pair up a program manager with an engineering team, and that engineering team is responsible then for how we build it, the quality of we're building it, when we release it, those type of things. And so that's typically a particular team, and those teams are typically made up of roughly around anywhere between 6 and 9 people. So, and every single group inside of our organization is made up of a very similar structure, right? They all have program managers, they all have engineering managers, and then engineering manager is responsible for the engineering team. You'll also notice here we don't have a testing team. We basically got rid of the testing team about 8 years ago. We were in that loop where we would have engineering work on it, pass it over the wall to our testing team. They would find a bunch of bugs, turn it back, and we kind of go do this back and forth thing. We found that if you're a service that's deploying on a regular basis, that doesn't work very well. And so the team then is responsible for the quality of the product, which means we're responsible for when it goes out and how it goes out, but we're also responsible if something goes wrong, they're going to be calling us up to go fix something if it goes wrong. So that kind of makes up of our team. And now the other point I'd like to make here too is, as we've gone out and had conversations with customers, we found that the most successful customers out there that have the least dysfunction across their software development system is where teams themselves have the autonomy to make decisions and go get things done. Who knows better than the team that's responsible for that part of the product? So in boards, for example, I'm having regular conversations with board customers. I'm dealing with our engineering team on a day-to-day basis. I understand the product better than anyone should understand the product. So me as a team, our team should be able to make the decisions on what features we should be doing, what are the things that we should focus on, what are the day-to-day decisions that be made. We have the autonomy to make those decisions. And so we found that those teams that have the autonomy to make those decisions usually have the highest success rate across the software development process. But there's a reality here that, if every team had the autonomy to go do whatever they wanted, it'd be a mess, right? You can imagine that if our boards team were doing things one way, and let's say for sprint, for iterations, right? So for sprints, you could imagine that if our boards team had sprints of 2 weeks, and then the repos team had sprints of 1 week, and another team had sprints of 3 weeks, it'd be very hard to understand what is getting done in what sprint and how to deploy that stuff out. So there's a certain level of alignment that needs to happen across the organization to make sure that we're all kind of pointed in the right direction. So sprint cadence is one of those. Another one is how our teams are made up, right? If I'm on one team and I need to go figure out what's going on with another team, I know exactly who to go talk to because I know who the program manager there is and who the engineering manager is. And so that makes it easy for us to have conversations across the entire organization. Another good example would be for alignment is we're all sitting in the same Azure DevOps project. So we all understand what a bug means and it all has the same fields. We all understand what a feature means and they all have the same kind of fields. Again, just imagine if everybody was in their own project and you're saying, well, this bug has this bug has that. You can define your bugs and your work item types as you see fit. It's very hard to have a conversation to understand what's happening. So there's a bunch of alignment things that we kind of go do to make sure that we're swimming in all the right direction. One of those things that we do, if we kind of line this up with Azure DevOps, is making sure that the things that we align on are at the top of the pyramid, basically, and the things that we have the autonomy are kind of near the bottom or in the middle to the bottom. So, for example, for alignment perspective, we do these things called OKRs, which is kind of Google's way of just doing objectives for your group. So it's called objectives and key results. So every semester we put a set of objectives together to say, hey, these are the big things that we want to go do, right? And I'll share some of those actually in a minute of what ours are. So we have these high level objectives that we want to go complete. Those are kind of come down from an alignment perspective where all of our leaders for each group will sit with our leaders for the entire product, and we all kind of decide these are the important things that we need to go do. Once that gets down into the feature team, so I understand that, here's the objective that I'm showing here is each team should deliver at least 2 top customer requests. Now it's on me as the owner for a particular team or group, if you will, for boards, is I need to kind of go figure out which ones of those are the most important to go do and making sure that they align with the epic that we've been asked to go do. So we align on the epics, we deliver features, those are the things that we align on, and then everything underneath that line is basically the team has a decision to go do. Teams can decide to work in a Scrum manner, they can do so. If they want to work with Kanban, they can do so. If they want to do something else, they can do sticky notes for all we care. As long as they deliver features and those features are aligned with the right epics, it really doesn't matter. And you can see here where our team does a lot with user stories and features, but we don't really do much with tasks. Tasks for us is an extra tax. It's a level of detail that we don't necessarily need. And that's just because we've been working together so long that it's not needed. Other teams, they are needed for. So, but the point here is the team gets to kind of decide what they want to go do. And this is just kind of another way of looking at it, right? Where we have bugs, we have these things called DTSs, which I can explain in a minute. Stories kind of roll up into features, features kind of roll up into epics, and these epics are loosely aligned with OKRs. So let me kind of give you a quick example of what that looks like in the product real quick. So here, if we take a look at boards, so this is our actual backlog and our actual epics. So here we have a set of things that we're working on, and we're actually in the middle of planning for next semester as well. But here you can see we have a couple big items that we're doing. We have our new Boards Hub work, which is basically we reskin the entire front end of the product. And now we're, let's see, can you barely see the text? I can zoom in a little bit to see if that helps. And I guess actually the details maybe don't matter too much. And so anyway, here you can see that, that's a major epic for us, and then the features that are underneath it. And then we can also see that we're planning out another epic for staying healthy. This is just for our team to stay healthy and productive and that kind of thing and getting things done. And then we're doing a bunch of GitHub improvements, integration improvements, which is the third item. And then the features that are underneath that. And so if we take a look at what that kind of looks like at a board, you can see here the board is actually quite boring, right? This is the board that I manage on a regular basis. Engineering team doesn't really look at this. This is the stuff that I'm using to keep our team aligned on. If I jump into the features, you can see it gets a little bit more detail. Here's where we're actually sitting with my engineering manager on a regular basis. We set up our own columns to kind of see how we've managed the work. I'll sit with the engineering manager on a regular basis to figure out this is the work that we want to go do, and making sure that we both agree, and constantly kind of filling up a set of work that's on deck to go get done next. And then when we take a look at the stories level, stories level here is really very specific to our engineering team themselves. So here we have an Azure Boards team. The team themselves execute on this every single day. They set up their own columns. They set up their own swim lanes that they're working through, that kind of thing. We set up their own styling rules, etc. We do basically weekly stand-ups. We do it twice a week where we sit down and kind of go through and take a look at, how are people doing, basically like a typical stand-up. We would do in how we're working together, what work is blocked, what work is not blocked, et cetera, et cetera. We take a look at, this is just one of the teams. If we take a look at one of the other teams here, which is our Avalon team, which is essentially the same thing, just a different team. You can see they relatively have the same columns, but obviously different work. And this team here manages it a little bit differently. They have different rules that they have set up, different swim lanes, et cetera. So anyway, I think the point here is the teams have the autonomy to kind of go execute on the work that they see fit. If we take a look at the work in the backlog then and how that rolls up. Sorry, go to the right one. All that work then obviously rolls up in the backlog that you saw first, where our epic is full of the different features that we're working on. Those features will then have a bunch of different stories that we're working on, and then those stories will have tasks if they want to, but in our case, we don't typically use tasks. Our typically is just stories and bugs. Matthias, let me know if there's any questions that pop up. Otherwise, I'll just keep kind of moving on. So that's kind of how we have our stuff set up and organized, where we kind of show our backlog. We've shown how we align across the team, how we have the teams the autonomy to go do what we want to go do. The next thing is okay, if we have a bunch of teams across a bunch of different groups, how do we organize ourselves in a way to communicate what is going on across those different teams, and what are the ceremonies that we have in place to make sure that everybody understands across the organization what the heck is going on. So the first thing we do is what we call, here's basically showing you an example of the different sprints. So we have 3-week sprints for us, and every 3 weeks is, we have basically 3 or 4 sprints in a quarter. And here you'll see that at the end of every single sprint, what we end up doing is we send out what's called a sprint update. And the sprint update is basically, it used to be an email where we would have all the teams send emails out to everybody. Now what we do is everything inside of Teams. We'll just do a Teams post that tells the organization, say, here's what we had planned in sprint 235, for example. Here's what we accomplished in 235, and then here's what we have planned in sprint 236. And so that allows each group to kind of post of where we're at, other teams to kind of view what's going on for those different teams, and then ask questions with those teams. So we'll get, our leadership will get in there all the time and start asking questions about, how is this progressing? How is that progressing, et cetera. And we do that through that Teams post, which is, again, is very straightforward. Here's what we have. Here's our highlights. Here's our lowlights. Here's things that we've done. We do a lot of time. We put a lot of demos together of things that, if we have something that's coming up and we're going to be releasing it, we try to demo that out. But it's pretty straightforward, right? It's just a post, and this happens every single sprint. The second thing that we do is basically every other sprint is we want to make sure that the work that we're doing is aligned with what the leadership expectations are. And we do that, which is basically called a feature chat. Feature chat is made up of where myself and my engineering manager get together. We put in basically the highlights and the lowlights and the things that we're doing and the progress that we're making. We also have some scorecards that we share of like how our team is doing based on debt, engineering debt, DRI resourcing, life side health issues, those type of things. But the idea is really just to understand how we're progressing, things that we're having problems with that we might need help on, adjustments that we're making, and then talk through a little bit about our roadmap of what's happening over the next couple of sprints. And this happens, like I said, every other sprint. So, every 8 weeks or so. and we sit down with leadership, and every leader inside the groups are allowed to attend that conversation, and people just ask questions and that kind of thing. And this allows us to basically align across the entire organization of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and making sure that the work we're doing aligns with the expectations of leadership, and they understand, the stuff that we're running into and problems that we're having, etc. And so this is a great conversation for folks to have. We also show, we also do a roadmap. I think I have it pulled up here. So I have a delivery plan where in that same meeting, I'm gonna put this out a little bit. I know it's a little blurry for you and the details aren't necessarily important, but when we sit here and talk about what we have planned, we'll basically show, here's what we have planned in 236, here's what we have planned in 237 and 238. And so we essentially talk about what we don't really talk about in that feature chat about what we have today going on in this sprint, because that usually doesn't change. We really talk about what's happening over the next 2 sprints. And we typically only plan about 2 sprints out at a time in detail, just because you start planning much further than that, the confidence and the ability to execute and get those done is a lot lower the further you get out, as everybody knows. But I'm pretty confident of what we're doing this sprint. I'm pretty confident what we're doing the next 2 sprints. But after that, things may change. And so we essentially just use delivery plans to kind of show these are the future work, because those are the things that we're aligning on. These are the future work that we have planned, and these are the things that we're doing over the next couple of sprints. And so we use that in that same conversation to kind of share with leadership what we're doing. And this is actually another example of the most recent sprint communication that we had. And you can see the different conversations that are happening across that after we go ahead and post that out. All right, and then we also do at the very end, typically what we'll do an OKR check-in, which at the beginning of this, a quarter or really a semester, so in 6-month chunks, at the beginning of those 6 months is when we establish those OKRs, like these are the big things that we want to go do over the next 6 months. And about every quarter we check in to make sure that how we're doing, right? Grade ourselves. Are we successful? Are we not successful? Do we have problems? Do we need to readjust? That type of thing. So we do that every quarter, and then of course every 6 months we do a whole planning thing that takes a few weeks to make sure that we align on the right epics that we want to go do over the next semester. So looks like there's a few questions in there, Matthias.
Yeah, I think we can start with one from Shaima that saw your nice titles with some icons and colors. So maybe that's a tip for the audience how you would do that.
Yeah, there's no secret. I go in there and just add the icons. So I'm just adding different icons in there. So I just use that because it's just a little visually easier for me to see what's going on. So there's no secret behind it, unfortunately.
All right, that's cool. And then John asked a question about how do you communicate technical debt to management? Do you use some metrics or reports for that?
Yeah, I'll get into that one next. I'll talk about, because obviously debt's part of the product, right? We all have bugs we got to deal with. We all have engineering improvements we have to make. So I'll talk about that one next on how we stay healthy that way. That'll be the next section.
Right. And then I think just a quick one, Helga, she mentioned, or she asked that you saw that you had crossed out tasks in your planning. So do you track that separately, or I think you said that you don't use tasks as much?
Yeah, so for our team, and again, this is where we have the autonomy to make the decisions for ourselves. We don't use tasks really at all. I think Herbert has one in here that he was using as a checklist. So we'll use it for a checklist scenario. As you can see, Herbert did here. Yeah. That's basically about it. That's all we use it for. We just find that doing the sprint planning with tasks is an extra layer of overhead for us that we don't need. We're having regular conversations about the stories. We're having regular stand-ups a couple times a week where we take a look at things. The team, they can break, if the team member wants to break things down to a bunch of different tasks, they can. That's really up to them. But we use them more for checklists. We don't usually use them anything above and beyond that. So if we actually go into our sprint planning, so if you're using our product, if you're familiar with Azure DevOps, and you go into sprints, typically you'll see a bunch of stuff in here where people would kind of manage. We don't have anything in there. So because we don't typically track any tasks in here at all. at that level. And we just switched over to a sprint. That's why you're not seeing very many things in there yet. We just switched over, but today.
Right.
Okay.
Cool. I think that's about it for now. And yeah, we're halfway through the hour, just to give you a time check as well.
Okay, perfect. I think we're doing okay. There's one here that Stefan asked about: is a feature chat a small meeting for each team, or is it across for multiple teams? So typically, since I just talked about that, I'll address it. Typically, what happens when a feature chat is like, so for us, we have an apps team, right, which contains pipelines, it contains repos, and it contains boards, and that's kind of in our what we call the app space. So that is a feature chat in itself. We have basically 1 hour to go through each of those teams. And so, so I basically get, so if we talk about boards, I get about 15 to 20 minutes to kind of go through our stuff, and then we hand it off to one of the other teams. And so anybody inside the organization that's at the leadership level, so anyone who's like a PM for for repos and wiki, et cetera, they can attend, and the engineering managers will attend, and leadership will attend. And that's just to keep some of the noise out, but also make sure that all the leaders for all the different parts of the product understand what all the other parts of the product are doing, type thing. So it's a not a huge meeting, but it's a medium-sized meeting, and it contains several teams for a group. Okay, so let me move on here. So some of the questions that you're talking about, like technical debt and whatnot, is I'll talk about how we stay healthy when it comes to that. So the first one is historically we used to have teams, people on teams that were really good at certain things, right? They're really good at UI, and that's all they did, or they're really good at APIs or the data layer, that's all they did. And we made a transition years ago that said, you know what, we have too many bottlenecks here, right? We can't just have one person just good at UI, and that's all they do. For one, they're going to get bored. For two, they're not going to understand the full breadth of the product, and three, they're going to get pigeonholed. And so we decided that over a period of time that everybody can basically do anything. Now we have certain people that have an affinity for the data layer or the UI layer that are better than others. And those people will be held responsible for doing helping with PRs, reviews, or frankly, if I need help with UI stuff and I'm not figuring it out, I'll go contact them. They'll help me out. But basically, the person or the people who are paired up working on a feature, they own the feature end to end, and they'll do everything within that feature, and they'll reach out for people to help where they need help. But that's one thing to note that's helped us quite a bit to keep things moving. The other thing we do to keep healthy is we follow this thing called a bug cap, where basically says, based on the number of engineers you have on your team times whatever number that is, that's the amount of bugs that you're allowed to have. So an example here would be 40 bugs, right? So let's say we have 10 members of the team and 4 bugs per person. The rule says, if you exceed your bug cap, you can't do any more feature work until you get your bug cap under control, right? So that helps us a lot with technical debt. And so we strive to do the best that we possibly can to keep that number under 40 in this case. If for some reason we get up above and beyond that, what we typically end up doing is we'll dedicate some people to work on just on bugs, or we'll even roll back a sprint to work on any bugs, or just work on bugs only, and no feature work for that sprint to kind of get those under control. So it kind of depends. Another way we do to help with that is what we call shield team. So a shield team is a strategy for us to say, hey, okay, we have, let's say we have 10 engineers. And what we'll end up doing is we'll take 2 members of our shield team. We'll take 2 members on that team and put them into what's called a shield team. And they just deal with all the interruptions and the issues and the life sites and the questions and all that kind of stuff. And we put them on that shield team for the entire sprint. So in our case, these 2 people would sit on the shield team for 3 weeks at a time. So they deal with all the junk. And then the rest of the feature team works on committed work, right? So they're working on feature work, or if there's any sort of engineering improvements that we have, planned to go do in that particular sprint, they go do. And what this allows us to do is this allows us to allow feature teams to go work on something for multiple sprints at a time without being interrupted. Allows the people that are on the shield team to understand what customers are really having problems with, so we can go fix those things. Typically, a shield team is not busy the entire time those 3 weeks, and they'll focus on then fixing bugs, dealing with we have a bunch of flaky tests that run on a regular basis that we need to go address, that type of thing. And so this helps tremendously of letting people stay focused on work, and then allows people to kind of rotate and feel the pain of the product and try to go make improvements there as they can make improvements. So this is the bug cap, and the shield team is a significant game changer for any team who is running into those struggles where people get randomized, where they're getting bumped because they can't finish any feature work because they got too many other issues going on. This makes a significant improvement on your culture, and where allows you to kind of focus on certain things to get things done. The other thing we do too is I mentioned earlier before that we don't have a test team anymore. Our team is responsible collectively for the quality of the product. So we do things what we call bug bashes. So, if we take a look at a 3-week sprint, the first couple of weeks we work on, whatever feature it is that we're working on. And if we think it's going to get deployed in the sprint, we'll basically do a bug bash on not only the entire kind of part of Boards product, but specifically on the changes that we just made. And so we'll do that at very, very early in the week 3. So usually it's the Monday or Tuesday of week 3. And then we'll just go through that. Everybody will basically take a couple hours. We'll test a bunch of stuff. We'll do a bunch of things like that. And then we'll come up with some bugs probably, and then they have the rest of the week to fix those bugs. And then they can make a decision on whether this feature is ready to be deployed or is it not ready to be deployed. If it's not ready to be deployed, then we just don't deploy it, right? We hide it underneath a feature flag and we'll make the changes and get it ready for next sprint. So that's one of the other advantages we have is we don't necessarily have to have something to go out in this sprint or next sprint. As long as it's pretty close, that's fine. If it waits an extra sprint, it's not a big deal. We'd rather have high quality work pushed out versus getting things out to adhere to some date that really doesn't matter. So that's the bug bash. And then the other thing I want to mention too is how we shifted from where our code sits inside our Git repos and how we deploy that out. And so, if we take a look at how we used to do things, essentially what we would do is Azure Boards at one point was made up of 4 different teams. And so at the beginning of a sprint, each team would go out and they would typically do a branch for that particular team or multiple branches depending on what was happening and start working, right? And then kind of get through the first week, and you get through the second week, and you get to the end of the second week, and the further time goes on, the further apart from the main branch it becomes. And we would get there down to the end of the end of the sprint and try to merge, and everything was just a disaster, right? There were so many conflicts because one team was working on something that was close to another team, et cetera, and it was just a mess. And so we end up shifting to say, okay, well, let's try doing it at the beginning of the week, and it didn't matter, right? And so it was just, again, it was a mess doing the merging. So what we decided to do then is we just let everybody live and work inside of the main branch. So everybody who's working on a particular feature, if I'm working on a feature, I will basically create my own little branch for that particular feature, work on it, and then I will basically merge it into the main branch as soon as that little feature is completed, rather than having these long-lived particular features. And the way we're able to accomplish that is through basically how we have our pull request set up, right? So we'll have pull request policies on there that says, hey, all changes have got to go through a PR, right? So you can't merge directly into the main branch. That's not going to work. You got to go through a PR first. That PR has to be linked to a work item. It has to be reviewed by somebody. And we have specific people and specific teams that are responsible for reviewing PRs typically, depending on how complex it is. And then every time you do the PR, there's a bunch of tests that run. We have what are called our basically unit tests, which is our L0, L1 tests that run, and they have to pass every time you run a PR. And so these are the steps that have to happen every time you make a change. And we also have some internal things that we try to do. So a lot of times, in order for features to be able to be accepted, we put them behind a feature flag, right? Because a lot of times we'll actually merge it into the previous branch so that it'll go out to customers sooner. And we do those things behind feature flags. So this is another great way. And this makes significant improvements on, you don't have that merge hell that you would typically run into if you had a bunch of feature branches. tests are run on a regular basis almost all the time. You stay pretty healthy most of the time. We don't usually have problems where people will, screw things up, basically. The other thing is, and I talked about this a couple of times, is feature flagging. So maybe it's important to talk about how we deploy first real quick. So when we deploy our product out, so let's say at the end of a sprint, we push out a feature, and let's ignore the feature flag thing for right now. We deploy it out to a number of different rings, right? And each ring consists of a certain set of customers. So our first ring, which is actually ring 0, which is ourselves, right? So our MSN, where I was showing you the product earlier, that's where our product sits. That's the ring, that's ring 0. So as soon as we get at the end of the sprint, we deploy directly to ring 0, and we let that bake for like 3 days, 3 to 4 days. And that just allows us to start using the product relatively quickly to see if there's any problems. Then ring 1 is basically internal users, right? Ring 2 is a small set of external data centers that have a small set of users. And then 3 is a little bit bigger. And then 4, we get into our international data centers, and 5 is all the rest. So as we deploy, it typically takes us about 3 weeks to deploy a particular sprint out into ring 5 to get to all our organizations. So it'll go into ring 0, it'll sit there for a few days, and it goes to ring 1, it'll sit for a couple of days, go to ring 2. And if we find a problem with it, we'll stop it, we'll put a blocker on it, it'll stop in ring 2, we'll go back and fix it. That fix will then go out to ring 0, ring 1, ring 2, and we'll validate it, make sure it's good, and then we can continue the deployments. So that's why, and usually every time we do something, every sprint, there's always some sort of mistake that's made where we'll have to put a hold on it quickly and then turn around, fix it, and redeploy. And that's why deployments take 3 weeks, but it also prevents any problems from getting out to ring 5, which is where the majority of our biggest customers sit. Those folks in ring 5 don't necessarily never see the problems that happen. People who sit in ring 1 will see things happen all the time. But that's okay because it's internal users, they're canary users, they understand that. But allows us to get eyes on the product and people in edge cases that'll show up to make sure that the product is in a good spot before we can deploy it out to the next one. So the other thing that we'll do too is what we call feature flags. It's not necessarily the greatest animation here, but a feature flag is basically an if statement you can think around a certain set of code that when turned on, it'll go down that code path, right? So if the flag is turned on, do this. If it's not turned on, don't do it. And so what we try to do is we try to do feature flags on any feature that we push out, especially new stuff that goes out, and we deploy that to the new ring. So a good example is we had a couple GitHub integration improvements that we just pushed out in the last sprint that's sitting behind a feature flag. We'll turn it on. And actually, this actually happened to us last week where it actually went into production GA, and then we realized we had a problem. Well, now we can actually just roll that back by turning the feature flag off. We turn the feature flag off. We're in there looking at the problem, trying to figure out. We'll redeploy it here in a couple of days, and then we can turn the feature flag back on. So this allows us to, if we do have problems out in production, where we can turn feature flags on and off, depending on who's looking at it and when, to control the quality of the product, right? So if there's a problem, we can easily turn it off. If we want to roll it out and put it out in production and just let a certain 4 or 5 customers use it, maybe people who have opted in as a preview, they can do that as well. And we can just turn it on for them to see how it goes. And again, it's just another mechanism for us to experiment, to refine it, to make sure that we're doing okay before we turn it on for everybody. All right. What do we got? Like 10 minutes left, Matthias?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. The only other thing I was going to show real quick is just, we do have a heavy reliance on telemetry. So we try to do a lot of telemetry in the features that we turn on. We look at a lot of telemetry. We're using Azure Data Explorer, which is what we used to call Custo, where we collect all that telemetry in the product and show it up. So we're using it a lot for like our new Boards Hub and people turning it on and off. To understand why they're turning it off. We can collect that type of telemetry. We have a bunch of different dashboards on performance and how things are performing, not performing, when features are being used, when they're not being used, how they're being used, et cetera. and that's how we measure our success, right? Like if we enable a feature that nobody uses, obviously we did something wrong. So what did we do wrong? Do we not let people know about it? Do we not communicate it? Does the feature just no good and nobody wants to use it? Is it buggy? Those are all things that we use. We use telemetry to help us figure out kind of where we're at in that world, and to understand how things are being used and why. So, all right, cool. I guess that's pretty much it. I guess I tried to go through it as fast as I could and leave some time for questions. So if you have any questions on anything, please, maybe Matthias, you can help me go through the list there.
Yeah, for sure. Great, thanks. Yeah, it's always nice to hear how others operate, and you obviously have a well-oiled engine. So one thing before I start looking at the other questions is that how do you manage your cross-group dependencies? Have you been able to work that out? So I mean, if there's a change that requires collaboration between, let's say, boards and repos,
Yep.
do you track that over an OKR, or is it also through epics and whatnot?
Yeah, so we'll typically track that at the feature level, right? So we'll say, hey, this feature kind of depends on that feature that you're working on. But the reality is we don't really need to do the telemetries very often, or I'm sorry, not telemetries, dependencies very often,
Okay.
because we just have the conversation with that team. Like, I'll sit with the repos team. We'll understand what you're working on. We'll work on it together. We understand what their timeline is. They understand what our timeline is. So it's less about like looking at a bunch of dependencies on a spreadsheet or in the product, and it's really just having a conversation with those different teams across as we collaborate with each other. So we have it in the product. I don't think this will be show very well because I don't think I actually have any set up.
Okay.
Yeah, you can kind of see them in here. I'll see different dependencies that'll line up. So if there's a dependency problem, it would tell me. So we have it in like delivery plans where you can set up dependencies with each other, and it'll let you know, like, hey, if they have they have it planned to be done next sprint, but you have it planned to be done this sprint, that's probably a problem, and we'll highlight that.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is I know that already because I'm having a conversation with that team, so it doesn't really become a thing for us. Yeah.
Right, and it's a maturity and a cultural part of your process as well.
Yeah, well, I think, and part of it is because we own a part of the product and another team owns a part of the product. The conversation, we don't have a ton of like cross stuff happening very often. We just kind of own it and do it and get it done. And then when we do, it's very limited. So we don't have a ton of dependencies across a bunch of different teams that happen on a regular basis.
And that's obviously what you want to strive for as well. So you manage dependencies by not having so many dependencies.
Yeah, yeah. It's part of it is just the way our product is kind of set up and organized, and but part of it is, yes, absolutely, is culture, and just trying to avoid those type of things, right? Because they're a mess when you start having to deal with a bunch of dependencies, and when a conversation is enough to to help us track it, at least for us.
All right, cool. I'll pick a few quick questions first, and then see if we have time for some of the more philosophical ones. But Jimmy asked, when you show all the test results, is there any automation happening there? Leading question.
Automation with test results in general,
or your tests. It's not manual tests that you had 79,000 test runs for, right?
Yeah. So the total tests, yeah. So these are all these are all automated tests. They're all basically, you can just think of them like unit tests. And so we run these obviously on a regular basis. These are all automated, part of the build basically that happens. Yeah.
Cool. That's a topic for another session, because it's pretty cool how you manage that at scale as well.
Yeah, and also to understand too, we don't do a ton of manual test cases. So I know we have the test part of the product, test plans are part of our product, but we personally don't, at least in boards, we don't track a bunch of test cases and go through them every time. It's pretty fluid. We know the things that are changing from sprint to sprint. Going through a bunch of regression tests is not something that we normally ever have to do. We do it when we try to do, we run through a bunch of tests, manual tests for when we deploy the on-prem product. So we'll have to go do a bunch of regression tests on that just to make sure we didn't screw anything up when we deploy the server product. And so we do have test cases for that, but it's mostly just like scenarios like, I got to open up a feature, I got to open up a backlog and move things around. So it's really just using the product more than anything to make sure that we got everything.
Okay. What else? So our good friend Martina joined the call as well, and she asked about she liked the Shield team practice, and she was curious about how engineers, if they prefer working this way, or if they have any morale questions about it. Versus
yeah. So I'll say this. So when I kind of left the organization for a while and came back, and then we got a new team that kind of came in and started running boards, and we weren't doing Shield team at all. And the engineering manager didn't want to run Shield team. And I was like, all right, dude, I'm telling you, it works. And he didn't want to do it. And so we ended up doing like people rotating every week, getting on these shifts that they would have to get on. And the team was like, man, I never get anything done, right? And I'm looking at the features, and it takes 3 sprints to get something done that should take a 1 sprint. And that's because people are constantly interrupted. And so when we do Shield team, the worst case scenario is basically you don't have to work on feature work, and you basically just work on interruptions, and you get a bunch of bugs fixed. And you just do that for a sprint, and then you go jump on a feature team for 4 sprints at a time. So the morale actually jumps way up. Because of the fact that you're not interrupted, you can focus on work, you can see progress getting done. Not having a Shield team, we have teams right now internally that don't do it, and they're constantly stretched thin, and you can tell that they get burned out. Our team right now doesn't really have a burnout problem. So so Shield team, from what I've seen between Bug Bash and Bug Bash, Bug Cap, and Shield team, you do those things and you can stay pretty healthy without worrying about burnout.
Cool.
Yeah.
One more about some tech stuff. Are you using static analyzers for any of your, I guess?
Yeah, we have CodeQL stuff running. I know that. So we do. I don't know the details on it though, to be honest with you. Which ones are, because I'm more of on the PM side versus the engineering side, but I do know that we do have code analyzers that are running. So things for running to make sure like passwords and stuff aren't in the code. CodeQL stuff, I don't remember what all the rules are for that are running on a regular basis. And so we'll get notifications when those bugs kind of reach our group, and we have to kind of go fix them. But yeah, we certainly do have it. I don't remember all the details on everything that we do.
Makes sense. Thanks. Yeah, maybe we can touch on this one as well. That Johan asked similarly, like we feel that he's happy with ADO, but gets the feeling that there are a lot of investments going into GitHub. Do you care to comment a little bit on boards versus, I guess, GitHub?
Yeah, my favorite question. So I'll say this. So Azure Boards, Azure DevOps in general has grown pretty significantly over the past 5 years. We grow roughly around 30% year over year. So even after the GitHub acquisition happened, we had a lot of team members kind of move over to GitHub to help them. We lost a lot of capacity for a lot of the work, but the product continued to grow. And so over the last 2 years, we've kind of reversed that quite a bit to make sure that we have to continue investing in Azure DevOps because we have a lot of customers obviously using it. And we want to make sure that they're happy. And the reality is that GitHub has still a ways to go for product planning piece of things and other areas as well before they can successfully bring on an enterprise size company to be able to use that product successfully in product planning. So this is a long way of saying that GitHub is investing heavily in a lot of different places. Product planning is one of them, but they're multiple years away before they're going to get to a place where our existing customers are going to be happy or can even consider moving. And there's going to be some customers that'll never be able to move over. Azure DevOps is going to continue to be invested in. As you can see, based on our release notes and our roadmap, we keep working on the product, and we're not going to stop working on the product. It's a big moneymaker for the company. It's a very successful product. We have a lot of customers using it. So the investments will continue in both, but you are going to see a lot more happening inside of the GitHub world on new stuff, just because they're playing a little bit of catch up on getting that product from the planning perspective to where they need to be to allow enterprise level, scale level customers to be able to use that product.
Yeah. And as you posted in one of your blogs the other week, that you're also continuing to enhance the integration between the two, right?
That's right. That's right. So we do have a public roadmap here. Let's see if I can pull it up. Although it doesn't really help because you guys can't read it very well, so never mind. So there is a public roadmap that we do. We can provide the link if you guys want, where most of our work right now is we're seeing customers that want to live in both worlds. Like they see some of the cool stuff that's happening within repos, whether it's Copilot, whether it's the advanced security stuff, whether it's code spaces. We're trying to, customers want to live and put their repos inside of GitHub, but they still obviously are going to do planning inside of Azure DevOps. And so we are looking at the traceability story inside of GitHub or Azure DevOps. If your repos are in DevOps and your plannings are in DevOps, is very good, right? Like there's some traceability is awesome. We want to try to do that same traceability as if when your repos are inside of GitHub. And so we have a bunch of improvements that we're making to make that better. We have a couple previews right now that are available if people are interested. We're making it easier to link to the GitHub commits and PRs, showing more information about the PRs that happen. Right now, we kind of just show open and closed. We want to show a bunch of other stuff there. Create branch, basically, we're going to go do. So there's a bunch of improvements that we're making and have planned to make over the next, probably 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's a great, like we say in Sweden, smorgasbord. We have plenty of options to choose from with these great platforms.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're getting closer to the end. I'll pick one final question, and it's from Jimmy that is always looking for more metrics. So we have a lot of the built-in ones, but have you heard any push for the DORA metrics recently, or?
Yeah, I can get with you offline on this one too, Matthias. You can help me. We have some folks internally that have basically been able to run the DORA metrics with a combination of Power BI using the analytics service and the REST APIs, and being able to generate a bunch of those metrics. So the short answer is we don't have plans to put it in the product right now. Our focus is on the GitHub integration work. Yeah. But we do have people internally that have done some of that work that can share, and I can't remember if they did a blog post. I'll have to double check. That allow people to kind of do it on their own if they're interested in doing it on their own.
And I don't want to, put down the initiatives behind the DORA, because I think it's interesting, but some of it kind of goes into the category that you started with, that about metrics that you don't track anymore. So it's also a cultural thing, right? So you can have a good conversation in the team about things to pay attention to, and then you evolve as a team. Yeah,
and to be fair though, that's us, right, internally. Now some people do care about that, and then it's important for them, and that's fine. But us as a culture, we don't care. So, but again, it kind of depends on your level of maturity and where you're at as an organization, for sure. Yep. But we do have a ton of customers that are interested in it, and obviously we get that ask a lot, and so. We have found a workaround for it using the Power BI and the analytics service and REST APIs.
Find the metrics that matters. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. I think we want to honor everyone's time. So thanks again, Dan, for joining and sharing how you run Azure Boards. It's been tremendously insightful for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody has any questions, they can certainly reach out to me directly if they have questions if they want to get access to the previews, that type of thing. We'd love to get more eyes on some of these previews that we're doing. And I appreciate you inviting me, Matthias.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone.
At scale, scaling agile is easier than ever. Easily visualize your PI boards and dependencies. Visualize your path with clear roadmaps, all securely within Azure DevOps. Set clear PI objectives and goals to keep your team aligned and focused. Prioritize efficiently using weighted shortest job first. Manage risks effectively with the role framework. Gain insights with flow metrics. Simplify safe in Azure DevOps. Try at scale today.